Oi oi people, Silky here, and you're listening to the Lifer Musician Podcast, a podcast exploring the minds of creatives who've dedicated their lives to pursuing a career in music. The Lifer Musician Podcast is brought to you by Hookings Management, my artist services company that empowers our fellow DIY musicians to grow a monetised fan base without a record label. We offer a range of services such as online marketing, artist mentorship, release campaign management, videography, photography, graphic and website design, plus tons more useful services that are built to cater for independent musicians on small, self-funded budgets. Helping musicians market and monetize their art form is our passion. So if you're an artist that needs help taking your career to the next level, please feel free to reach out and get in touch via hookingsmanagement.com, where you can book a video call with me for some free advice on your project. On today's episode, I'm honoured to be joined by UK dance music royalty Barry Ashworth from Dub Pistols. Barry has an incredible long-spanning career in the music business, which has included tours around the globe, multiple charting releases, a $1.5 million record deal with music industry legend Jimmy Iovine's Geffen-owned Interscope Records, plus collaborations with music industry legends such as The Specials, Busta Rhymes, Horace Andy, Madness and Gregory Isaacs. I'm sure that Barry's wealth of experience in navigating this tough industry is going to make for a hugely beneficial listen for our listener base of DIY musicians. So without further ado, let's get into it. Barry Ashworth, thank you for joining me today on the Life of Musician podcast, mate. Thank you for having us at your beautiful gaff on this sunny day in Hertfordshire. How you been, mate?
I'm good, fella. I'm really good. I've spent a week in Ibiza, and I've had a weekend off, so I'm pretty relaxed. Just want to pick up on you say royalty. If I was going to be royalty, I would say I was Prince Harry, because I've been pretty much an outcast for most of it. Do you know what I mean? And as far as goes, incredible. I think the only incredible part of my career is that I'm still here.
How's that for an intro? Love it, mate. So, all right, let's take it back to the start then. You had aspirations of being a footy player as a youngster. You picked up an injury and then went on holiday to Ibiza. Whilst you were out there, you experienced the club scene and you took ecstasy for the first time, which ended up being the catalyst for your music career journey. Can you talk a bit about that experience and how it led you down a new path in life?
I think when you was growing up, excuse me, when I was growing up, I think, especially through the 80s, I think, you know, I think everybody had aspirations to be a footballer. Music was always my thing, but it always seemed something that was way out of the realm of anyone from a working class council background who couldn't play an instrument or had no musical talent apart from throwing shapes on the dance floor. Do you know what I mean? So football was always my thing, still is my thing. You know, Liverpool, my team. My family are all Scousers, just so I can get that out there, because everyone's wondering why I'm talking like a Mockney, but support a team from up north. It is deeply rooted in my family. Going to Ibiza, 1987. I think I was in Mallorca first. I was in Mallorca, and again, this goes back to the football bit. We were quite young at the time, I think around early 20s. Football violence and, you know, being very territorial at the time was a massive thing, so you could never go outside your area, you could never go into another city, you could never go anywhere without getting into some kind of tear up with people. And we were in a bar in Magaluf, and we got into a massive tear up and pretty much got 3 bells beaten out of us, do you know what I mean? So we had to do a runner from Magaluf, got on a ferry to Ibiza, and got over there, and it was just like the whole vibe of the island was totally different. And I think Ibiza's always been a special place anyway, going back through history. And someone offered us this drug, ecstasy. I think it was like £25 a tablet at the time, came with instructions on how to take it. Went to a club called Amnesia. DJ called Alfredo was playing. There was quite a few other South London lads over there at the time. Paul Oakenfold, Trevor Fung, a load of people that I'd known from school, and just got on this pill. As you know, it was a loved up drug. And it didn't just change my life, I think it changed the course of history, football violence, and music generally. Do you know what I mean? Electronic and dance music had always been around early, from your Chicago house to your disco to whatever, but suddenly it was a thing. And it was a really, really small... I stayed out for the whole summer. I was pretty much out of my mind for most of it. Me and some lads from the local area got back, and there was only a small bunch of people that were doing it. It was a real cottage industry. Started putting on these club nights and doing these. Anyone who had been to IB for that year got the idea, do you know what I mean? So but it grew really quickly. Do you know what I mean? I think we started running a club in Streatham called Ziggy's, and it just propelled from there. Other people were putting on nights around London. So I'd say, like, who was the DJs at the time? Paul Oakenfold, Trevor Fung, Ramplin was doing the Shum. There was just various nights that just kept popping up, and you could go out 7 nights a week, and then suddenly that was it, the birth of club culture. It was a year before 1988 when it turned into the Summer of Love.
Mm-hmm. The second Summer of Love,
the second Summer of Love,
historically known as,
So it was pre that, and it was just a fantastic time, suddenly from going to, literally in trouble all the time, to being loved up and thinking you could change the world.
Because it sort of wiped out the football violence, didn't it? The ecstasy culture.
Well, it did eventually. It did eventually because before, like I said, you certainly couldn't. If you generally were following a team around, you were going anywhere you go, you'll get attacked at any one given time going into another city, and suddenly, like, because each IB had an effect on not just London, but then there'll be Leeds with your back to basics, Liverpool with your cream, the bomb in Nottingham, the arena in Sheffield. So all of a sudden you were going to all these different cities that you could never visit before, with people with the same attitude as you, where they're all loved up. I think Mr. C come along with he's a good, and that became a massive terrace chant.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It was suddenly everyone was loved up on the terraces rather than beating free bells out of each other, which could only be a great thing, even though it was demonised in the press.
So how are you hearing about these raves? Because obviously this is way before social media. Zines weren't really a thing in dance music like they were in punk, right?
No, I mean, even mobile phones were pretty new. Do you know what I mean? So it wasn't. It was pretty much you were in the know. You knew a friend of a friend who took you along.
Was pirate radio? Was that a big part of it?
Not really for me at the time. It was more word of mouth that was just spread. Boys Home had a fanzine that they put out, which was great. But it was literally just word of mouth, and the speed that it just went from cottage industry to, a massive industry was rapid. I'm talking like, it just blew up straight away. You could literally go out 7 nights a week and you'd be off your tights 7 nights a week. Do you know what I mean? You'd still be dancing at work the next day. Do you know what I mean? So it was pretty incredible times.
So you caught that wave, like, pretty much just as it was, like, really building the momentum, and got into club promoting when you come back from Ibiza. Was that your full-time gig for a few years then after that holiday?
It wasn't my full-time professional gig. I mean, right. I earned good money out of it. We ended up running most of the bigger nightclubs in London, say like the Southwest One Club, which became the Ministry of Sound, Studio Valbonne, Café de Paris.
So did you have a day job whilst this was going on?
Yeah,
as well?
I was working in the film industry as a runner at the time. So I managed a place called Westway Studios, which is where. So I managed to blag that place and have a few parties in film studios, which were fantastic. Without losing my job, no. Luckily enough, the guy who owned the studio, I won't mention his name, but he was he was a bit partial to the chemicals anyway, so he loved a good party and thought it was a great idea.
Brilliant.
You know, so yeah, so that kind of grew, and there was that was a really, I mean, it was the most incredible time, and it really was, like I said, you really did suddenly think you was on the verge of changing the world, and being loved up was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it grew so quickly, but being a London promoter, the problems came very fast in that you could, at the time you were paying probably £150, £200 for a DJ. I remember when DJs started charging £350, and I thought everyone had got greedy and had lost their mind, you know, because it was a cottage industry. But the thing was as well was that in London you could put 6 of the biggest DJs on at the time, and most Londoners would be blagging and would be only say, like, I'm only coming up, I'm on the guest list. But one of those DJs anywhere else around the country would sell out, you know, 1,500, 2,000 cap venue.
Yeah.
And it just meant that the prices shot up very quickly, and it meant the bottom line in London was very difficult to hit.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it was pre M25 raves. That was that was still to come yet.
Yeah. So when did all that kick off then?
I guess that was really, I suppose, the summer of that was summer of '88, Summer of Love, the second coming of summer, you know. And for me, that was the Antichrist. Do you know what I mean? At the time, you know. I used to call them acid Teds. You know, it was like, you know, a load of people driving around. It was everything I didn't want. I wanted to keep this scene underground. I wanted to keep it for ourselves, and, like, do you know what I mean? Selfish and stupidly. Do you know what I mean? But when you realise that these people were running 25,000 people events, and the amount of money that they were generating was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
That you realise, you know, which was really the prelude to a lot of festivals. Do you know what I mean?
So these, like, fields in, like, Essex or whatever, and warehouses and that, they'd have like 25,000 people turning up.
Yeah, and the thing was, the police used to turn up expecting a load of trouble. And all there was a load of, like, 25,000 people off their nuts. Do you know what I mean? Hugging the coppers as they turned up, and the police just didn't know what to do with them. Do you know what I mean? So it was a real strange scene, and obviously it'd been demonised in the press. You know, they were, you know, it was really, really demonised, and I think really what it was the government hadn't learnt how to make any money out of it yet. So once they realised that if they legalised these parties, that would obviously help the health and safety issue, but most importantly to them, they would get their cut of it.
Tax money.
Do you know what I mean? So they became festivals. Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's like, and what is going on now? It was just a prelude to that. But at the time, it was like illegal rave, demons, drug barons, this, and it was just like.
Yeah, I never really thought of that time period as being that. That was the birth of music festivals, wasn't it?
Certainly electronic music festivals. Obviously, Glastonbury had been going for a long, long time, but certainly, there wasn't many festivals compared to what there is now, and they strung up from out of those places. Do you know what I mean?
So you were doing club promoting, you had your day job in the film industry, and then you started your artist career in the band Deja Vu.
Yeah.
So was you DJing, like, before you started, like, before you gave yourself an artist name and started that group?
No. My brother was the DJ in the house at the time, so I didn't want to step on his shoes. Do you know what I mean?
Older brother?
Younger brother.
Okay.
He was resident at our clubs, so I'd sort of backdoor for that, and I was really just happy with promoting. Do you know what I mean? So I was, you know, there was a gang of 4 of us that were promoters: myself, Blaine, Spencer, and Steve, and then I guess the Happy Mondays come along. The Manchester thing started to happen, Stone Roses, and that whole wave. We very early on in the club scene, it was about the Balearic Sound. It wasn't necessarily just acid house or house music. Alfredo was playing everything from, you know, Wooden Tops YYY, In Excess, Need You Tonight, Cure, Do you know what I mean? So it was a real Balearic-y, they called it Balearic Sound, Chris Rea, Josephine, all sorts of music that you would not associate with dance music today.
Yeah, and Why was a song that you covered, wasn't it? And that was your sort of like charting hit in that band, wasn't it?
That was, getting back to Manchester, and what that did was Manchester properly stole the thunder for that whole scene, and there was wave after wave of bands that were coming out of there. I went to Spike Island to see the Stone Roses.
Amazing.
That was incredible. That was really amazing. And there was a group of us running clubs in London that kind of wanted to start our own London sound. Do you know what I mean? So there was a band called If, which was Simon Eccles from Boyzone was in. Sean McCluskey was running a club called Love Ranch. No, Sean McCluskey was running a club called Love Ranch. He had If. Simon Eccles from Boyzone had Airstream. We had Deja Vu, which is our record shop. We started the band. I hated the name. It always made me feel like we were a covers band, which is ironic because our only hit was a cover. But it was basically it was like us wanting to put London on the map, back on the map as bands. And to be honest, not many of us, we weren't really that good. We signed to Charlie Chester's Cowboy label. The only really good band that came out of it were a band called Flowered Up.
Yeah.
Who were absolute nutters.
Yeah, I've heard of them. I'm not listening to their stuff, but they like supported Madness and that, I think.
Yeah, they were absolutely top lads. But again, wherever you went, it was chaos.
Yeah.
You should the video and the song you should check out. It was 15 minutes and it was a hit. It's a 15-minute long track produced by Clive Langer, and it's called Weekender. And it's absolutely, Andy Weatherall's done a remix of it as well, and it was just absolutely brilliant. And a friend of mine, Wiz, directed the video. They signed to Heavenly Records, but I would say they were the only ones who really came close out of all of the bands that I just mentioned to really doing it. But they were the perfect rock and roll band in that they made this brilliant record. They made an album, but they made this one brilliant record, Weekender, and then split up.
Mm-hmm. And this is while, like in Manchester, you got Stone Roses, Happy Mondays, and Spiral Carpets,
Super Dragons, Liverpool had The Farm.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? It was like London. We didn't have anything. We did have Flowered Up, and there was another band, Ariel, who were in this first. We did a show at the Astoria, and Ariel, one of the guys from Ariel turned out to be Tom from the Chemical Brothers, so he went on to have a decent career.
Yeah, not bad, eh? Mate, it's interesting you should mention the London Astoria. I loved that place. I think it shut down when I was like 19 years old, and I was gutted because that was a big one on my bucket list to play, It was pretty grimy, but it had a magic in that room, do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, it's an iconic, London venue, and it'll be really sad if the Academy goes the same way, Brixton Academy goes the same way, I mean, it was, I think, one of my favourite bands of all time, Weller's lot, The Jam. I remember just watching a video of them with photographers strapped to the masts, do you know what I mean, to the posts, filming it, and it just looked absolutely brilliant. And it was fantastic playing it, ain't gonna lie.
Yeah, I bet,
But
mate.
the beauty about being a promoter, and I know that you'll understand this, because you promote your own shows as well, was that we had quite a speedy acceleration into the size of gigs that we were doing. Mm-hmm. Because I was running club nights with 1,500 to 2,000 people. As a promoter, meant that I already had a ready built
business model.
Audience, if you like.
Okay,
so instead of having to go the pub route and do all the things that
because you had a following for your nights or whatever, you could showcase yourself as an artist.
Do you know what I mean?
Brilliant.
So the maddest thing about that was like I said to you, the Mondays were, and that Manchester thing was a massive influence on me, but the Mondays were pretty hedonistic, as we know. Do you know what I mean? And that was basically how I started. We weren't really that good. Do you know what I mean? It was very much sort of DIY. We just said we were in a band, started a band. I couldn't sing. I'm not sure I can now. And we just formed this group. And within I think our second show was at the Astoria. Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
So, and it was on Channel 4, I can't Rapido and God knows what. Do you know what I mean?
Was
So
that a
I-
show that you put on? Was that one of your own nights? At the
Yeah,
Astoria?
yeah. It was a
Wow.
good combination between ourselves, Sean McCluskey, who was running a big night called Love Ranch, and like I said, Boyzone was probably the biggest and most iconic movement in the London scene at that time. So, you know, we pretty much could sell it out pretty quickly.
Amazing. 'Cause you had the mean Fiddler as well, didn't you? Below that was a good room as well.
Yeah. No, it was you know, it was like I said, it was a quick acceleration. We weren't really that good. The press decided we were. I think my favourite reference review was we got called football hooligans from a disco in hell, with the mob-like demeanour of the Happy Mondays, only infinitely more wired.
Fucking brilliant.
Which I
You
exactly.
got to get that framed and put that on the wall in the studio.
Which
surely.
I thought was like the most brilliant review ever.
So
The
that's
rest of the-
deja vu. That's not Dub Pistols.
No, that's
they're
deja
describing
vu.
there,
It got
yeah?
worse once we joined the Dub Pistols. But, and like, you know, we literally went, you know, pretty fast. You know, we were on the word. We were pretty grim. And most of the time, and there's a theme here because it carried on throughout most of my career, was I was just out of my mind.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Whether it was drink or chemicals, do you know what I mean? I spent a long time pretty flying.
Yeah, yeah. So Dub Pistols then formed in 1996. Is that right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I find fascinating about the early career of the Dub Pistols stories is the way the UK press turned on you guys so quickly. You formed a band, as I say, in 96, and your career kicked off with loads of momentum. You signed to Concrete Records, an imprint of BMG. The big beat genre was buzzing, and your song Cyclone got playlisted on Radio 1, becoming a chart hit. But it seems that some bad reviews from the likes of NME and others sort of killed that momentum in the UK pretty quickly. I think one of the things that was tough about the music business back then, from what I've observed, is that a few bad reviews could be really detrimental to your growth as an artist. And I don't... Just wait for that car. I don't think the music press
That's
is...
the police turning up.
Finally caught up with you.
Sweeney's here, showing me age now.
Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, what was I saying? So, yeah, a few bad reviews could be really detrimental to your growth back then. I don't think the music press is as influential on listeners' tastes anymore. I think music fans think more independently. That's probably got to do with how we now intake our media. It's like less bottleneck. And I think that's healthy. I just wondered what your take was on all that.
I don't know if I've ever taken it. I mean, the British music press has always been pretty hardcore. Do you know what I mean? It was like, and to put that in perspective, you know, it was when we started off with the first single, "There's Gonna Be a Riot." We went from, you know, Radio 1's single of the week, Enemy single of the week, you know, Melody Maker, everything. Do you know what I mean? Everyone was totally and utterly on it. Do you know what I mean? And we got nothing but great reviews, and it was all going really well. The big beat scene was like massive at the time. If you want to call it big beat, it went from Amel House to trip hop to big beat. And same like dubstep, it just literally dropped off a cliff. Do you know what I mean? So by the time we had finished an album, which was never meant to be an album, it was only a collection of dance floor singles, dance floor cannon fodder, if you like. The record company, after Cyclone was sort of done well, that the record company wanted us to make an album, and it was literally cobbled together point blank. And yeah, once the album had finished, the big beat scene had literally dropped off a cliff. You know, from that scene there was like Fatboy Slim, you know, gone massive and still is obviously global. Chemical Brothers had come out, Propeller Heads. The list just goes on. And Wise Guys. there was like loads of fantastic groups that really shot off quickly. A bit like the Manchester scene, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That it really took off, a bit like dubstep, and then suddenly just boom, out, gone. Do you know what I mean? And like I said, I've gone from being, single of the week, this, that, and the other, absolute darlings of the press, to the review that sticks in my mind again. And it's funny how you only remember the bad reviews, really, even though I really like the one I mentioned earlier. It's only really the bad reviews that you mentioned. I remember being called the sound of Norman's sweaty jockstrap. Do you know what I mean? So, fat boy sweaty jockstrap. And it was pretty clear, and the rest of the reviews were weren't great either, to be honest. And yeah, it just literally drops off a cliff. And I remember, talking to my record label. Luckily enough, there was a guy called Gary Richards, who had a record label called 1500, which was signed to A&M in America, and he'd been hustling our label for ages to sign the album to America. And the record company just said to us in the end, look, it's not going to happen for you here. I think you should take this deal and go to America. So that's basically what happened. Regarding my take on the press now, I don't know, the whole industry's changed. It's not just the press, it's, how do people, again, because when I just put out the last record, because I'm still in that old school thing, I want to chuck a load of money at that kind of PR. I don't know whether that's the wisest way to spend it anymore. Whether or not social media ads or different ways of doing your digital marketing is a lot more effective now than necessarily going down, because most of those broadsheets are gone. Do you know what I mean? Most of those, yes, there's still one online enemy. Yes, there's still one online clash and this, that and the other. Yeah. But they're not as important, for sure.
No, that's the thing, innit? I feel like I remember growing up being in bands and the NME still being a huge deal. And I used to watch it happen in like real time. They'd really build a band up. An example I can think off the top of my head was the Twang. They were like on the cover twice before their debut album come out. Really great band, bit of a sort of Manchester revival thing. They really built the Twang up, and then they'd been on the cover like a couple of times, and they were saying how they would, from memory, they were hyping them up as saying they were the most important working class band since the Arctic Monkeys or something along those lines. And then the album comes out and they give it a 6 out of 10. Do you know what I mean? And then there's barely any press for them after that. And I think at the time, MySpace and that was certainly, social media was happening. Do you know what I mean? And fans were starting to discover music, consume music in that way. But yeah, I do remember a bad review being a really big deal for bands growing up, and now it just doesn't seem like your album gets like a bad review in the Guardian or wherever.
Well, I remember being very much aware, very conscious from early on. I mean, first of all, like, yes, if you were on the front cover of NME, or if they were getting behind you, then they would really get behind you. Same if you had a Radio 1 playlist. The way that, like I said, music is consumed and that anymore, and there's so many different radio stations, everybody's got a radio station for every single genre of music, do you know what I mean? So it's whatever they're into. Going back to the NME and things, that it would make your career, do you know what I mean? And like you said, a bad review would absolutely destroy your career. So the trick was always to make sure that you had someone that you knew was favourable to get that first review in, so that you got a good review. Because in my experience, the press were like sheep and everything was like the emperor's new clothes, and it only took one person to say this was brilliant and they would all fall in line. Same as if one of them said it was shit, they would all jump on it's shit. So you had to control. And I still think to a certain extent now, you've still got to be aware of how you put your stuff out and put your stuff together. MySpace, again, when MySpace came out, I think that actually saved our career. Right. Do you know what I mean? Because that was because if you wasn't in the NME and if you wasn't on a radio playlist, then nobody could. No, you lost your fan base. You couldn't connect to them in any way whatsoever.
It was just bottleneck media, wasn't it?
Well, suddenly everybody, because MySpace blew up so fast that you literally reconnected with all your fans around the world. And, that was literally a massive turning point for the Dub Pistols again, where we'd really hit rock bottom. And then suddenly we could connect again with the fan base without having to worry about radio, without having to worry about press.
Yeah, so that was the sort of start of how things are now, really, like the MySpace thing. Yeah,
I guess so. And I think the surprising thing, and I was still a bit gutted about how quickly MySpace blew up, you know, and how influential it was, and yet how fast the wheels came off.
Disappeared, didn't it?
Just went.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, that was quite shocking, and because it really was, you know, the birth of this whole social media thing. And, you know, it was sad, but like I said, I mean, I look back at MySpace fondly because it totally saved my career.
It's interesting because I remember like the early Arctic Monkeys demos and going to MySpace to like binge those, and Enter Shikari was another band that done so well through MySpace. You know, they were just DIY, going around in a battered old van all year, just playing, you know, the grassroots venues, and they had this thing they were building on MySpace, and then they scaled it all the way to selling out the Astoria unsigned. But yeah, without MySpace, they wouldn't have been able to do that. And then when there was a bidding war for them in the end, but I think they decided to put the first album out DIY. Do you know what I mean? And that, for me, felt like the start of what this like new era of music is. You know,
I mean, there was a point when me and the lads as well, like the boys that I was talking about, a couple of record shops, one in the King's Road, one in Covent Garden, Deja Vu Records. But I remember you're saying about what Major's doing at the start of this whole DIY thing. At the time, record companies had decided that CDs were the next big thing, and they weren't going to do vinyl anymore. Now, the things that were going into the charts that were in the CDs were selling not many copies, and yet an underground dance floor record, we could sell 15,000, 16,000 of them, just either at a rave or just in your local
That's the thing,
record
innit?
shop.
I think
in
dance culture and hip-hop culture, there's always been that hustling DIY element, but yeah, I guess
we were selling more records, vinyl records, than they were selling in the charts.
That's incredible.
Do you know what I mean? Just like, you know, underground dance music.
Yeah, it's just now, but I guess artists are given more pats on the back for it because the infrastructure's there to register your material properly and gate crash the charts and that. But with white label vinyl and that just weren't, you know, that infrastructure wasn't there.
Well, some of them would get picked up, like your Snaps, your Powers, your, you know. Eventually, the majors got involved, and then it was obviously came out some massive tunes. But, a lot of it went under the radar. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's a ska label in the US. I want to say Moon Ska, it's called, and it's like a 90s label, like third wave ska revival. And this guy sold like fucking millions of records from the basement in his house over like the span of 10 years or whatever.
It's all right because we're also near to an Air Force base, and we're going to have a couple of fly past by a couple of B-52s in a minute as well.
We've arranged that especially for us.
Yeah.
It's kind of you.
Go back again.
New album's obviously doing well. So the DIY thing, it has always been happening. But from memory, like Enter Shikari, I know there was certainly bands that achieved this before. But they were the first band I was following that bypassed getting a record deal when they had it all put in front of them and got a charting album and got the front cover of Kerrang and everything, and chose to keep it their own business, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean that's the major thing about being able to add that hindsight, belief, trust. And back in the day, to launch, you know, to break a record used to cost over £1 million. Do you know what I mean? That's what an average label that's what it'd spend to break a band.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But the problem is, there was a few things that happened, and the things that really sort of upset me now is back in the day, in every town, in every city, there would be a club, and each club would have a scout that would go out, and they'd go and watch bands night after night after night. And then they would, you know, see if this band were any good. And occasionally one band would come along, and there would sort of be a sort of natural groundswell around them. They would eventually call up the A&R person, do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They'd come and watch them. They'd offer them a free pizza, do you know? and then that's how you kind of got discovered back in the day. Now to me it seems like all they want to do is stick it through an algorithm and work out if it's shit enough.
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like nowadays as well, you've got to be the finished article for them to even consider you. So you've probably got to have had to have charted already and sold a certain amount of tickets and everything before they jump on board.
Yeah,
The
but
money's
again,
just
those
not there,
you
is
can
it, anymore?
manipulate those numbers. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's what's the frustrating thing is. Obviously, you can manipulate those numbers quite easily, which a lot of bands do. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, without a doubt, you've got which is for me is a massive lazy part of modern day A&R. Do you know what I mean? Like I said to you, it's a lot of it's an algorithm. A lot of it's how many likes you got, how many followings you got, how much. It just doesn't feel like they're doing their job.
Yeah, well, it used to be that a good label would sign an artist and develop their career. You had this thing referred to as artist development, and now the artist has to do all that themselves, I think, to even be considered.
I mean, you say that. I believe that they used to sign a load of stuff, and it was like throwing shit at a wall.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Something would stick.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And what they did, they didn't actually develop bands, a lot of bands. What they did do was they would sign you, put your first single out. If that didn't do well, which again, because of where you are in your career, if the first single didn't go off, then basically you were pretty much put on the back burner, and they'd put your rest of your records out, but then you were done, and then they wouldn't let you go.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because they couldn't let anybody else make a success out of it.
Yeah, so cutthroat, isn't it? I mean, something similar happened to me in my old band. We got signed to a reputable dance label that were licensing the big artists they had for a major, and they wanted to do the same thing with us. And when they didn't get the bites early doors from the major label to license the record and give them their infrastructure, do you know what I mean, their financials and network and everything, we were shelved for like 3 years. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, no, I definitely think you're right. They certainly, it's common knowledge, isn't it, that labels did that. They just sort of sign loads of stuff,
Loads of things, especially, and everything that
things.
sound alike. Again, I guess it's no different today. You know, we complain about it, but like, if it was like a Manchester band, anyone that sounded like a Manchester band, you could have won it or whatever, but then you were gone. A few of them, only a few of them, like your Stone Roses, Charlatans, etc., really stayed the course. Do you know what I mean? Most of them had one hit and they were gone.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
So you went out to America with A&M Records, and toured point blank out there.
What happened was we signed to A&M, signed to 1500 through A&M.
Yeah.
I remember being at the A&M Christmas party. The music industry really was in the doldrums in those days.
Was that like when Napster and all that?
Record companies were losing money hand over foot.
Yeah.
And again, I put that down to this record company shooting themselves in the foot, because it was like, it was the start of the free music thing. And rather than embrace downloads, they just said no. So basically they made people go and download records for free. Do you know what I mean? Because it was the only way you could download them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Even they couldn't see that was the future. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was like leaving HMV's doors open all night, letting people just go in there and steal the records. Whereas I think if they'd embraced it early doors, nobody would have minded giving their favourite band £1 a download or 50p a download, and it would have become part of the culture that you were paying for music. It didn't. Music became free, and this is why we're in the state we are in today.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Agreed.
It's like music has been devalued so much, but I believe it was that mistake made by them early doors that caused that.
Yeah, they didn't sort of embrace it.
They didn't embrace it till it was too late, till music had become free.
So you go out there and all that's going on, but you've got this deal with 1500, and how long did you tour out there for?
No, what happened was we signed to 1500. Like I said, A&M were in a terrible state financially. They'd had their worst year on record. At the Christmas party, the head of A&M was running around dressed as Santa Claus, saying A-I-A-P-A. A&M Records giving money to all his staff, which was really uncomfortable because half of them had been laid off. It was really embarrassing. It was in the Charlie Chaplin studio. Was
this 99?
I can't remember exactly what year. I think it would have been in 2000, same. Maybe about 2000 by now, 99, 2000. And anyway, 1500 was doing really well. As like Gary Richards, you know, he's absolute genius. And he signed us. He signed Crystal Method, who were like the Chemical Brothers of America. And we got the Tony Hawk's game had happened. Point Blank really started blowing. Cyclone was playlisted on God knows how many stations around America. I think we got to number 2 in the billboards. I think things were going really well, and then A&M went bankrupt. So it was like, yeah. So it's the story of every band. What can possibly go wrong? It was like, so that was it. It was kind of like, oh fuck.
And I just wanted to interject there. Your limited company is called
What the Fuck Could Possibly Go Wrong Limited, which is what the documentary is about. But so suddenly we were told that was it. That record was done. Just as it was, we'd just started to win awards. We'd just been playlisted on everything, and then we got told to stop. That they weren't promoting that album anymore, and that was kind of it. We were done. Luckily enough, we've been doing some other stuff, and Gary Richards introduced me to a guy called Richard Bishop. Richard Bishop's quite a big deal, sort of American management. And he went into a meeting with Jimmy Iovine and Jordan Scher, and they were going in to talk about Crystal Method, and Jimmy Iovine played Richard this track called Soldiers, which was a track we'd done with Planet Asia, and he said this is the best record I've heard in like 10-15 years.
What an amazing accolade from like music industry, fucking legend.
Mind-blowing,
yeah.
Absolutely mind-blowing. So, I mean, I was broke at the time, absolutely potless, and Richard Bishop said, look, well, actually it's a band called the Dub Pistols, I manage them, and literally the next day flew out and did a $1.5 million deal.
Fucking divine timing right there. So, all right, before we get on to the big deal, because I certainly want to pick your brains about that, it's fascinating.
It was an accident. It wasn't no stroke of genius. There's no masterclass in this one.
Love it, mate. I think there's a lot to be said in this industry. So with the Tony Hawk thing, so that's how I come to know you, because I was like 13 when that game come out. That obviously opened you up to this whole new mass audience. Yeah. How important do you think that sync has been for your career, that one sync? I
think that one game, and we've had loads of games. The good thing about signing to someone like Universal or to Sony's and things like that is they own PlayStation, they own the movie studios. So when they give you the $1.5 million deal, they're going to get their money back one way or the other, which is by licensing all these to all these different games, to all these different films. So we were doing every film soundtrack. We were doing every game going. But the Tony Hawk's one was the one that blew it up for us.
Yeah,
you know, and then suddenly. That's the one that everybody knows us for, because everybody was playing Tony Hawk's. And in America, obviously, the skateboarding thing was even bigger.
Because you got on the Warped Tour and all that, didn't you, off the back of that?
The Vans Warped Tour off the top of that, you know, and suddenly you were playing with everybody, and we were remixing your Limp Bizkits, your Corns, your God knows what, you know, and getting really good money for it.
Love all those bands, yeah.
Yeah, so suddenly we were touring and we were roped in, and them was getting letters from them saying that we were their inspiration, which was just like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? So it was kind of quite of a mad time. It was brilliant, and it was where I would say that I learnt more about being a band, marketing, and how to embrace with your fan base than I did at any other period. Because in England, most bands and most audiences used to be quite reserved. Whereas in America, I noticed when we were doing that Vans Warped Tour, the merch thing was massive, and everybody wanted to meet and sign them, and the queues for the merch stalls were absolutely huge, and everybody wanted to come and meet you.
So were you down there working that after every show? Were you down there doing?
Yeah, but I didn't have our marketing. We didn't have our merch sorted out. Like even the smaller bands on that tour, the merch they had was next level. Do you know what I mean? We had a T-shirt. Do you know what I mean? But it showed me that if it opened my eyes up to what the possibilities were. And the best thing about Americans as well is when when they get into your band, they stay with your band. So you start playing to two people and a dog, and they just keep going, and they stay with you forever. And especially if you put that effort going in down to the merch stall, go and do your signing, go and do everything, then they'll be with you. Do you know what I mean? And they'll stick with you. So, I mean, that was the biggest eye-opener to me. That was the thing I learnt most.
Cool. So then, yeah, you get picked up by Geffen Interscope and sign this mad $1.5 million record deal. You were skint at the time. You mentioned on the Life in the Stocks podcast that you were pretty reckless with the money at the time in your life, and upon your return back from the US, so we'll get into obviously how you ended up coming back over and that not working out the way you'd anticipated. You thought you had 120 grand left, only to discover you were 16 grand overdrawn. You've since re-established a successful artist business for the Dub Pistols. How did you get yourself out of that financial hole and rebuild the artist business?
So we come out of where I'd blown all the money, and it weren't just 1.5 million. It was a hell of a lot more, because we were like getting 25 grand a remix, and we were doing 2 or 3 a day and turning them away.
Fucking hell, mate.
We were being synced, as I said, to every film, this, that and the other, so we're getting huge payouts to that. So it was a hell of a lot of money that we'd blown. I mean, I did a feature for a magazine, you know, how to blow £1 million with the Dub Pistols, and it was all we called it chocolates and flowers and chocolates, in an Elton John type style, but it was mostly nose whiskey, and it was just living the rock and roll dream. Do you know what I mean? Everything. And the problem is when you're earning this kind of money, you kind of think it's going to carry on rolling in.
You must feel like you're in a movie or something.
You just feel like it's going to carry on rolling in. Everything, it seems like it's got no value. Do you know what I mean? In terms of, it just doesn't, everything seems surreal.
Actually, I just want to, so you mentioned something on another podcast I listened to where you said that you'd owned a flat, and during the interest rates thing that happened under Thatcher, where people were literally throwing the keys back because they couldn't afford to pay their mortgage, that happened to you, didn't it? And it changed your relationship with money.
Yeah, it totally changed my relationship with money, and I guess it couldn't be more relevant than the circumstances we're finding ourselves in today, with interest rates going up the way that they are, and a lot of people being so used to borrowing a really low rate that we're talking about 6-7%. To put this into context, when Thatcher happened, and it happened to me, interest rates went to 14.5%, and literally overnight my flat dropped to about 30% in value. My payment has gone through the roof, and I just started taking ecstasy, and I just thought, fuck, this pill's not places.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I done one. Do you know what I mean? I literally just threw the keys back and done one. But because of it, I knew, and I wish I'd faced up to it a lot earlier. I knew that whatever I had, they were going to take off me because of this mortgage debt that I had. I wish that I'd faced up to it earlier, because the way that it ended, and they didn't let it go, because it still came on top many years later, that I got a knock on the door, Barry Ashworth, Nationwide Anglia, you owe us X amount of money. And I remember shutting the door, and I just went, wait there a minute, mate, and I run upstairs. I came back down, opened the door, patted my pockets and went, flat out, what are we going to do? Do you know what I mean? And I ended up having to give them something like 15 grand to clear that.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? That debt. But the effect that had on me for 10 or 15 years was that I knew that I couldn't have anything. So every penny I got, I spent, because I knew if I had anything in the bank, it was going to be taken away from me. So I wish I'd manned up early enough, faced them, especially when I had some money, and sorted it out. But I just went on the run. My tax was in a terrible situation. My finances were in a terrible situation. I just used to come home with piles of cash and blow it.
Did you have like a business manager or anything for the band?
I had managers.
Yeah.
They had managers, but they weren't handling my finances. Do you know what I mean? They were handling the deals that we got,
and just getting you paid.
Then they would take in their cut, and then I was getting my cut, and whoever else was getting their cut. So I knew my cut had to be gone quick.
So You get back to the UK, and like I said, we'll get on to how that all ended up being that you moved back and everything. And you thought you had some money left out of this pot that you generated in the US, and you were overdrawn. So yeah, how did you rebuild from that point?
I think the most disappointing thing about what happened was there was a lot of people earning a lot of money out of me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That whether or not it was lawyers, whether or not it was, people who were on retainers, managers,
Press
whatever.
people, whatever.
There was a lot of people who were on a lot of retainers. And the most disappointing thing was the minute they thought I was in financial trouble, they all threatened to sue me. Do you know what I mean? That was heartbreaking. I remember my manager when I phoned her up and I was literally shaking, going like, what am I going to do? She'd say, around, you've had a good time, Barry, and you? Do you know what I mean? Like it, which wasn't a lie. Yes, I had. I was like, what are we going to do? And like I said, everyone from my lawyer who was literally charging, I can't remember how much, like a ridiculous amount of money a year just to do these contracts that, which they would just play out. And then, so I managed to get some royalties that I was owed, paid everyone off, some of the fuck off, and then just started again on my own. Do you know what I mean? Just started from scratch. Do you know what I mean? And just thought, well, because it really did it hurt. It was painful at the time. Because it was people that you'd worked with and trusted. And like I said,
so you literally wiped the slate clean, brand new team and
started again.
Excellent, mate. And was it all indie labels after that point?
Yes, after that it did. But that's because that's after the Geffen deal. I mean, obviously we had 4 years where we were signed to Geffen and things were great. Do you know what I mean? And 9/11 happened, and then that was the week our album was coming out, and that's when it all fell apart. Yeah. So yes, after that, and when I got back into the UK, then I was pretty much, I didn't have a clue what I was going to do. It took. Our 6 Million Ways to Live album didn't come out because of 9/11. It was due to be released that week.
Lyrical references to terrorism and stuff, right?
Yeah, for whatever reason it didn't come out. It wasn't actually the label's fault it didn't come out. We were their number one priority. Things were going great. I thought for the first time in my life that I'd cracked it. But history took over. Do you know what I mean? The world changed and our record didn't come out. Geffen offered me something like £120,000 to stay. My instinct was that once you're put on the back burner, you never come back. Do you know what I mean? So I was like, no, please, just let me go. I need to put this record out. I just want to go back to the UK now. I've had enough. And let me start again. And they agreed. It took, I went around to Jimmy Iovan's house, had a massive conversation with him. When he agreed to let me go, they still took 3 years before they gave me that record back. Do you know what I mean? So
why do you think that is?
Because again, it goes back to the same thing that I said before, that even if a record label believes, if they believe that you're not going to happen, they still can't let somebody else. If they let it go to somebody else and it happens, they've got egg on their faces. And
so it's fiercely competitive between them and the other majors.
Yeah, well, you can't be seen. It's like so they just held on to it for so long, and I was very naive in my approach, that I honestly believed that we'd come back, because I thought 6 Million Ways to Live was a great record, that I thought we'd come back and get another deal straight away. Do you know what I mean? That somebody would give us a deal. And nobody would touch us with a barge pole. They were like, well, if the biggest record company in the world has let you go, why should we sign you? Do you know what I mean? So it didn't happen straight away. Do you know what I mean? It was quite a sort of long, painful period.
So you've really had to graft it, really, from, well, you always have, but from that point, like, of being in financial bother and...
Yeah, I think it's the story of most bands, though.
Yeah.
What goes up comes down, and and what if... But I think the underlying thing to come out of this, if anyone can learn anything from me, is to never give up.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down, just to keep going. Do you know what I mean? Still have the belief when everybody else around you has given up. Do you know what I mean? Just keep pushing on. Because, you know, it is like a fighter. Once you're down, and if you stay on that canvas, you're out. Whereas if you keep getting up, sooner or later you're going to land one.
Yeah,
do you
love
know
that.
what I mean? You know,
Great
so
analogy, yeah.
that's the biggest thing. If anyone could take anything away from this, we ended up getting a deal with a guy called Richard Full, run a label, breaks label called Distinctive, which God knows why he signed us, because we were like, no, not because like, you know, obviously we'd started as a breaks thing, but 6 Million Ways to Live was really, you know, a way more musical, song-based album, whereas Point Blank was obviously much more dance floor, breakbeat sounding.
Yeah.
So he signed us and saved my career. Problem was a great record that blew up on XFM, and that kind of launched us again back out live. But it wasn't. But we weren't to stay with that label because it wasn't the right label for us. And then we wrote Speakers and Tweeters. And again, it took a long time. And I remember I was going to judge a competition on the Isle of Wight with Rob the Bank from Festival. And he was there, and I remember he was going back to London. I was supposed to stay the night, and I jumped in the car with him, made him listen to the album twice. He went, "Barry, I love it, but we can't afford you." You know what I mean? I was like, I didn't care about the money. It was just about put the record out.
Yeah.
I'm worried about the money. Do you know what I mean? And so that was sort of like how we started to come back up.
Yeah, and it was important for you because you felt like sort of culturally aligned to Sunday Best and Rob the Bank.
You know, Rob the Bank Festival was a big part of our association, and it certainly gave us some kudos and a place to build and grow. Do you know what I mean? They weren't all over us. We've never been really A&R. Do you know what I mean? Never been told what to write or how to sound. Do you know what I mean? Just been allowed to express ourselves the way we wanted to.
And so the latest album, Frontline, that's completely DIY, isn't it?
Yeah, that was more about, and it's no disrespect to Sunday Best, and it's no, because like I said to you, I've put 7 albums out with them.
Yeah.
And they've done a great job, and and for me, I just felt like we've gone as far as we can go. I'm in a position now, through various different reasons, that there's no reason for me to give away 50% of my royalty to a record label when I can employ the same people that they're going to employ to do the same job, and I can pretty much do the same job. You know, yes, it takes some backing, but you know, if you can get, and I had the money, so, and we're not talking about like the millions that it costs to break a band anymore.
No,
it's not cheap. You know, by layman's
probably
terms.
more like 100,000 now, and it's to break a band to a point.
If you want to talk about the top end, but you can probably do it for 40, 50,000. Do you know what I mean? Now, again, that's not an unsubstantial amount of money. Do you know what I mean? But you can crowdfund that money if you haven't got it, or the way, you know more about that than me. Do you know what I mean? In terms of the way, you know, you have a much more astute take on things. But I find myself in a position, because I've sold my house, because I've done various different things, that I had that money, that I could do it, and it was just like, well, why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Play to you, mate.
We'll see. You know, I mean, we achieved exactly what I would have expected to achieve on Sunday Best, if not more. Yeah. But it now, like I said, you know, as we own our own record label, so it just seemed like a much better idea.
Yeah, if you can fund it yourself and retain 100% ownership, then it's a no-brainer, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And well, I guess the important thing is, like you mentioned, you've got to know that you can employ a good team for it, because
you've got to make sure you've got the. You know,
you don't want to end up staying up till 3 a.m. posting vinyls out yourself and all that.
No, and you've got, and because we've been going for 25, 26 years, that we've got a good solid fan base. So the pre-sales and things like that are, you know, they're up there already. Do you know what I mean? So it's taken, you know, that time of building up that whole database following. Yeah. I mean, I hate calling them fans. So, you know, for me, they're family. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
You know, the amount of love through the good times and the bad times, they've always been there, and they've always supported us.
It's a proper community, isn't it? Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I hate that term, fans.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because when we're talking about it in clinical business terms, fans are customers, but that just feels so wrong, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? And the band are products, so it's
yeah,
not,
yeah.
do
There
you know
you go.
what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like it's
yeah.
not like that. And I don't know. Again, like I said, going back to those early days in America, and spending that time with people at the merch store or whatever, and you see these people gig after gig after gig, and you have drinks with them at the bar and things like that, and they become friends. Do you know what I mean? And especially now with social media, where you'll have certain people that they constantly reach out
an
for you.
extension of that,
Or do you know what I mean? And then they are friends. Do you know what I mean? Because you ask them how the family is, or you look after them. Do you know what I mean? Or you can see when they're in trouble and they'll reach out. So,
yeah, wicked, man.
it's important.
So I think this is a good one. You've often described Dub Pistols as the most successfully unsuccessful band. Could you explain what you mean by this?
Exactly that. Do you know what I mean? The fact that we've had a 26-year career that has been littered with absolute disasters and failure, yet has been also incredibly successful in that we've continued to go. Do you know what I mean? So it is. I mean exactly what I say. We're successfully unsuccessful. We've never, we're not littered with top 10 hits and #1 albums and this, that, and the other. Do you know what I mean? We don't sell out O2 Arena, but we have a very decent career. Do you know what I mean?
Tribe of people that follow you year in, year out. Yeah. Amazing.
I haven't got to worry about what the press say about me. I haven't got to worry about what the whether or not I've got a playlist on radio. Do you know what I mean? We've got a good solid fan base, and it's there. Do you know what I mean? So of course you want your album or your record to do as well, but as we said, is it as relevant now as it used to be? I don't know, but we have a career, and I'm already booked halfway through next year, and I can do as much or as little as I want.
Brilliant, mate. Well, I was saying, so we were chatting on the way down here, and we were talking about this kind of stuff, and we were saying how it's interesting. We're in a period now where there's bands that sell out, even as big as like the O2 Arena, that have never had daytime radio play. So bands like the War on Drugs and the National, for example, they can fill out an O2, but they've never had daytime radio over here. Idols did 5 nights at Brixton last year and are probably going to headline Reading at some point. I don't think they've ever had daytime radio play, maybe 1 or 2 spot plays or whatever. But yeah, that just wasn't the case, was it? Like 15,
no, you've
20
been back in the
ago.
day, like you said, you needed to have a front page of NME and you needed a Radio 1 playlist and a spot on Top of the Pops.
The Top of the Pops, man.
Do you know what I mean?
I love watching the reruns. Me and my missus, if we were in on a Friday night, we love watching reruns.
There was very much a formula to what the way things had to fall in line, and I don't think that's there anymore.
I guess. Go on, sorry, mate.
No, I just think there's so many different avenues now that you can go to, and like I said, there's so many different radio stations, podcasts, just different ways of connecting with people.
Definitely, I think it's a lot more of a democracy now, the music industry.
I think Bandcamp's fantastic.
Yeah,
do you know
brilliant.
What I mean? It's
Shopify is great for bands. Do you know what I mean?
If you go and do a little test where people are getting it, a lot of people will go and do that because they want to give something back to the bands. They don't necessarily want to stream it. They'd like to pay something to the artist. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So those kind of things are great. And like I said, like the Patreon thing that you're kind of doing, you'll know that it's not quite Patreon.
Same
but
kind
it's
of
the same
infrastructure.
format.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I do think something that worries me about the Patreon method seems to be like a lot of DJs seem to bootleg records or do edits and then sell them as if they're their own.
Yeah, that's not
kind
cool.
Of a little bit. That to me is not cool.
Yeah. But I think aside from issues like that, I actually think the subscriptions will continue to grow and be a massive thing for artists eventually. So if you think about a band like Arctic Monkeys, they don't need to because of the size they are and everything, and being on a big indie label is working for them just fine. But if a band like that were to sort of, or even a band that's, let's say, like,
but they probably can turn around to their record label now and either threaten to leave or cut themselves a much better deal.
Yeah, which is great. But if a band of like that size, or even like a quarter of the size of Arctic Monkeys, decided to create their own version of a Spotify / Netflix thing where you can only stream the new album and download the new album through their app, do you know what I mean, and only receive like certain content like music videos and stuff. Obviously you want to be out there on all the socials.
There is a problem with that, obviously.
Go
First
on.
of all, you've got to have the fan base.
Yeah, you do.
Which
you have to build the fan
which
base
is what
first.
you've got to build in the first place.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So that's down to getting your socials right,
Yeah.
making once you're there, that works. But
Yeah.
you've got to keep building that and then sending them that way. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
You know.
I think that's where it's going to head, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years. I think bands will be doing more subscription-based stuff.
I think they are already.
Yeah.
I think most bands already are. And certainly, like we talked about it, you know, off camera earlier on. So, you know, 100% that's the way it's going.
Because it's just predictable income, recurring income, and that's something that's so difficult in the music industry.
But you've got to get that catchment first. And you know, the worst thing about things like Spotify and things like that and their playlists are the majors have got control of that.
Yeah, well, they're all shareholders, aren't they?
You know, so you know, we talked about it earlier on with the lottery winners having a #1 album and then not even touching the top 100 the week after. And then you look at the charts and it's, you know, nothing against these artists. It's the best of Elton John, it's the best of David Bowie, it's the best of Fleetwood Mac. It's all these historical acts that the majors own their back catalogue that are still dominating the charts, which is just like, it's not right, it's broken.
Yeah, it's interesting how they're all selling them off now, though, isn't it? Can they see that
Well, someone offered me $1 billion from a back catalogue, I'd probably wave it goodbye as well. I think Queen have just done some sort of deal like that.
Mate,
you know?
Bob Dylan, wasn't it, a couple of years ago? I think he sold his catalogue off.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, just got a couple more questions. So you mentioned earlier there's a lot of parallels between yourselves and the Happy Mondays. You've mentioned before that they're the band that you feel like that made you feel like it was all possible. Both Dub Pistols and the Happy Mondays are renowned for your partying antics. Why do you think drink and drugs often comes with the territory of being a musician?
I think historically it always has. I think a lot of artists have, and I'm not talking about just musical artists, whether it's artists who paint, art poets, writers, actors. I think you know, there's always been that element of destruction.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think the music industry, certainly back in the day, you know, sex, drugs, and rock and roll were a massive pull.
It was congratulated,
do you know what I mean? You know, they were, and that was certainly what would draw. Like I said to you, when I say about the Mondays, it was the partying lifestyle that I kind of felt that drew me to that kind of thing.
Yeah,
and so, you know, but at the same time, it's your massive downfall. You know, it's a downfall as well. But I do think, you know, obviously, the long days, the late nights in the studio, whether the late nights touring, the highs you get from gigs, the riders, the drinking, that soon spiral out of control, that take a hold. Do you know what I mean? So, you know, it's always been in the industry, and I think artists are changing now. I think the younger generation seem a lot different, but certainly back in the day, you know, it was just a massive part of the industry. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I remember growing up and the Britpop thing was happening, and there was that quote from Noel saying like, "Oh, I'm doing a line of coke's like having a cup of tea." Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think very much. You know, the problem is with this, and you know, it's something I've become very aware of having, and during COVID became very much more into focus. Those things really start to take a hold and can destroy your career. We're lucky enough with the Dub Pistols, we got to the point of, you know, we've always pressed the detonate and destroyed our own career. Do you know what I mean? And the drink and the drugs and the bad behaviour pretty much took us to the edge of we're done. Do you know what I mean? It was like, I think we'd gone for a really bad period. We'd always gone for another really bad period, but we got to a point where it had become so bad that the shows were embarrassing. We couldn't. There was no way we could perform. We hated each other. We were literally drinking from breakfast till stage time. It was embarrassing when we was on stage. It was embarrassing when we were off stage. And so a friend of mine just came up to me and said, "Look, Barry, I'm not being funny, mate, but people have come to see you, and I'm embarrassed for you." And I think. It just changed everything, and we, you know, went into rehab, went and reconsidered things, and came back and started to think what it was that what do you want to do? Do you want to, if you're not enjoying it, stop, and if not, then it's carry on. We still like to party, but it's the show's the most important thing.
You've got the balance now, the professionalism comes first. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, like I said, going back to lockdown, that mental health and having lost so many friends through drugs and drink. Do you know what I mean? Whether it's been suicide, whether it's been overdoses, whether it's been whatever, it's I've seen it, and I've seen the destruction. I've been surrounded by addiction all my life, so it's something that it's weird because I won. There used to be a magazine called Music Magazine. Ben Turner used to be the editor. It's quite a big deal at the time, and they used to hand out an award every year for Cane of the Year. Brandon Block had won it, a load of people, and they gave it to me one year. I think I was the last one that was eligible for it, and I refused to accept it, and not because I didn't deserve it, because I probably was the Caner of the Year that year. It was like I didn't want to be responsible for one person starting to take up drugs or drink, knowing what the outcome would be, because I didn't want to be that person that made them go down that path thinking it was all going to be all right, because I'd seen the amount of people that it weren't all right for.
Yeah, I think, what do you think about this? Because I've been reflecting quite a lot on this recently. I come from a long line of addicts myself. I've been sober for a little while now. I think that a lot of musicians are addicts by nature, because I think to get good at music and get so far in music, you've got to have a bit of an addictive personality to persevere. Do you know what I mean? And what do you think about
absolutely. Without a shadow of a doubt, I think that's been proven. Do you know what I mean? I think that's quite scientific, but also, like I said, you take it and you drink your way out of depression, but you become more depressed. You take drugs to get high, but ultimately just all goes down low. You can never stay up. It's trying to keep on chasing that high. You can't. You just can't. And the effect it has on your body, the effect it has on your purse, the effect it has on your family is ultimately going to destroy you. Do you know what I mean? So, like I said, don't get me wrong. I'm by no means a saint, but I'm not the wrong one that I was. And nor's the band, and it wasn't just me. It was anyone. When you see the documentary, you'll understand. It was like it was carnage.
Yeah.
It was real carnage.
But that was the sort of culture then, wasn't it? I remember growing up and like idolising like all the Britpop bands and everything, and it was just so. That was what it was, like you say, sex, drugs and rock and roll. It come with the territory. Do you know, I almost felt, I'd imagine at times you'd feel like a fraud if you weren't being like that back then, because it was congratulated. Well, you were certainly, we were frowned upon for being a goody two-shoes,
Cliff Richard, do you know what I mean? You'd put into that category. No, you had to kick on.
Yeah. Now, there's an old saying in this business, never meet your heroes, but I think you might have something to say about that. The Specials were a band that you idolised as a youngster, and you've mentioned before in interviews that Terry Hall was like a god to you. You ended up collaborating with Terry in both the studio and for some live shows. What was it like to work with your musical hero?
I've had some fantastic experiences working with my heroes, and I've had some a couple of real nightmares. Terry was totally different. Terry was God to me. I remember the first time he came around my house, in Ilbert Street in West London, and I couldn't believe he was there, first of all. I mean, I was a nervous wreck. We recorded Problem Is. He sung it in my front room. He was the nicest guy you could possibly ever meet. He was a real sweetheart, Terry. Do you know what I mean? Really, really was a genuine person. So he was absolutely fantastic. And, we were lucky enough to tour together for 3 or 4 years. And when I say touring as well, he wasn't at every show. He would do some shows and not all of our shows. But it was at a time, again, when I'm talking about when we were at our worst behaviour. And he would be sort of sitting around us while we were having punch-ups and, out of control, when he'd just roll his eyes, do you know what I mean? Just like, he'd seen it all before. Because he'd been in the Specials, you know what I mean? And they obviously had their own problems. he, I guess, endorsed us. Do you know what I mean? You know, having someone like Terry Hall, who is an icon to so many people, be part of your life and part of your musical history is unbelievable. He was really dry-witted. You know, he would say things and you just crack up. Do you know what I mean? It would be so deadpan.
Yeah.
So you know, and he'd just cut you down in a New York second. But he was brilliant. And for me, his songwriting, you know, is second to none. And I've been lucky enough to have him in my life. Do you know what I mean? And it's broken my heart that he's gone. Without
So
meeting Terry, you know, we got to meet Linville, you know, and we were doing the Rock Against Racism in Victoria Park. I think it was 100,000 people that day. And it was the first time Linville and Terry had played together for 20 years. And that was and we did Gangsters, and I've never seen a crowd go so crazy. You know, it just went off. But I think that, you know, Terry and Linville were walking out and people were saying how good the specials were, and Terry was like, well, it weren't the specials, it was a dub pistol.
So that was
the catalyst for them getting it back. So for me, that's some huge pride. I remember we supported them at Brixton Academy on that first comeback. And I mean, what can I say, apart from immense pride and someone I considered a dear friend, you know, so.
Amazing. Okay, mate. Well, look, I've absolutely loved this chat. It's been a joy to be sat here in the garden in the beautiful sunshine. Chewing the breeze with you, mate. I've got one more question that I want to ask you before we conclude, and that is, what's the one bit of advice that you give an aspiring music artist that's just getting started on their journey?
I think we already mentioned it and tapped on it earlier on, is belief.
Yeah.
Belief. Believe in yourself, back yourself. You're going to get knocked. You're going to get criticised. That's nature of the beast. Do you know what I mean? Art is subjective.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Just because someone says it isn't any good doesn't mean it isn't any good. It's just their opinion. So always be true to yourself. Something I learned very early on in the music industry was... make sure the decision's your own. Make sure what you do. Don't let someone else talk you into something you don't want to do, because ultimately they'll drop you and you'll be gutted that you made the wrong mistake. At least if you did what you said you'd do and it went wrong, you've got no one else to blame but yourself.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So always be true to yourself and just keep going. Just keep on going. And also remember why you're doing it. It's because you love it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, you do it because you love it, because it can be a really tough industry and it can be a painful industry, but you just got to remember it can also be the most brilliant time of your life.
Beautiful stuff. Nice one, Barry. It's been a pleasure, mate.
Cheers,
Thank
brother.
you.